Disclaimers. None of the footage used in this video belongs to me. I don't have a way to record my own, but there are multiple links to the original user up in the iCard at the end of this video and in the description. Also, since this is an in-depth video, the people who have actually played these games will get the most benefit from this. That being said, I get it, this is a super long video. So you know the first comment thing down there? I put all the important timestamps there, so feel free to use those if you need/want to. Now, without further ado, you may remember from my E3 2018 video that I said I hadn't really played any of the iconic and classic PlayStation games, including but not limited to Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy VII, Ape Escape, and Parappa the Rapper. Someday I plan on finally taking part in all these iconic franchises. But since then, the Crash and Sane Trilogy came out on the Switch, so I lunged at it so I could finally learn why these games are so cherished. And golly gee, these are classics. So I couldn't help but dig in to try and find these games' working parts. Yeah, games. You heard me right. I'm doing all three of these games in one shot, so you're getting 3 analysis videos for the price of 1. Nice. Since we're starting at the beginning though, most of the level design discussion and stuff will center around the original Crash Bandicoot, with the sections for Crash 2 and 3 focusing more on sequel changes and additions. I also won't be acknowledging changes from the original games to the remake, as I haven't had the chance to play the originals, and I want to focus on the games as they're presented as part of this trilogy. Let's talk guts. Now, since Crash is a linear platformer, its guts are way streamlined, whereas a game like Pikmin looks like this, Crash's look a lot more like this. The only real main goal is to get from one end of the stage to the other, with Crash's very simple moveset and each of the 5 quadrillion collectibles being smaller elements within each stage, and then you have the visuals and music surrounding that. That goes for all 3 games with a few slight alterations. As for the marsupial himself, Crash can run, jump, and spin to attack enemies, as well, that's it actually. Although the spin is quite versatile, as you can keep some movement going as you spin. Not to mention, you can smack enemies and have them destroy other baddies behind them or even upcoming boxes. I also love how Crash can accidentally spin collectibles away. It really forces you to slow down and be careful. The biggest issue is Crash's jump. I've usually heard him described as heavy, but that's a really specific yet vague term. Real oxymoron. Basically what people mean when they say that is when Crash jumps, he's slow as heck. It can make the tight jumps this game forces you to do really stressful. As for the levels themselves, they're laid out in a linear fashion. Your goal is always to head from your point A and get to the teleportation pad thing at point B. Across this game's 28 traditional levels, there are several themes that get repeated. Each of these themes have their own sets of platform types, just in different orders. That may make it sound like these levels have just been thrown together as a mishmash of parts, but that's not the case at all, and here's a good example. In the level Castle Machinery, you can see the goal right at the start, but since you can't reach it, the level is about you climbing back up in order to reach it. Every level has little touches like this, and that makes these levels feel at least a little inspired to me, even if they are really just back-to-back sets of tiny obstacle choruses. Now, if 2 levels from 2 different themes had the same obstacles used in similar ways, that would be lazy. But the fact that each theme has its own set of platforms and each individual level uses them in different ways, that shows me that at least some serious effort was put into these levels. But if there's one thing anyone knows about Crash Bandicoot, it's that these games are hard as diamond. Each level is full of tricky jumps, very strict timings, and situations that will kill you like that. As such, it's one of the few games that gives me severe anxiety while playing. Even though the first couple of stages are pretty easy, stages like the Great Gate will hand your butt to you if you aren't careful, getting you ready for this tough-as-nails adventure ahead of you. Crash Bandicoot is very much a trial and error game. You make a mistake, see what you did wrong, and then try again. To compensate for this, the game throws a bunch of extra lives at you so you can hopefully avoid a game over and starting the level over. I will say, this is my second full playthrough of the game, and Crash is way better on subsequent playthroughs. My first time through had me seeing the game over screen a lot, but this second time wasn't so bad. I finished the game in literally 3 hours this time. Knowing what was coming in advance really gave me the advantage this time around. That sentiment extends to the boss fights. None of them are very difficult at all, and they really just require pattern memorization. Dodge, then hit. Dodge, then hit. The only boss that isn't like this is Ripperoo, and he sucks. He jumps around in a specific pattern, so you need to bounce on these floating TNTs to hopefully have it explode in his face. Easier said than done. This Crash will slip and drown if you land on the ledge because, quick detour here, this game uses pill-shaped hitboxes. Hitboxes, for those who don't know, are the invisible boundaries around game assets that determine if they're touching something or not. The big issue is Crash will slip backwards and fall off ledges because of the shape of his hitbox. You can use this hitbox to get a jump in if you walk off a ledge by accident, but more often than not, you'll just slip and fall to your death. Anyways, if I had to pick my favorite boss, it'd have to be Embryo. I like how he chucks those chemicals at you and you have to dodge them, and then you have to trounce on the blobby thingies. But my favorite part is when he makes a Hulk-like transformation in the middle of the battle. That is hysterical. None of the bosses are truly difficult and they don't really add much to the game, but at least they're competent, mostly. And they add a lot of personality to the game. Something that does add a lot to the game are the set pieces. You can argue whether or not these stages are competent or not, but the boulder stages and hog riding stages are at least inherently enjoyable. Yeah, the timing on the hog riding ones can be difficult and a little annoying, but the novelty of being propelled forward or having to platform while running towards the camera is enough to make these stages well worth being included. Even in regular stages, the game uses different camera angle types to keep things fresh. The most common are being behind Crash as he runs forward, or being to his side. While the game is essentially a 2D game being presented in a 3D space, not really taking advantage of the new access like Mario 64 did, for example, this variety in the viewing field is certainly commendable. We may have discussed the majority of the actual level structure, but let's face it, even with all the trial and error stuff, and even with Ripperoo, this game's only about 30 stages long. In order to slow down the player, they've added a crud ton of collectibles for you to look out for. There's your Wumpa fruits, and those basically function as coins for Mario. You collect 100, you get an extra life. Extra lives are also represented by these cartoony Crash heads. There are other head tokens you need to look out for too. A ton of Bandicoot, Embryo, and Dr. Cortex faces to be specific. Collecting 3 of each as you find them throughout a stage will allow you to unlock the portal to their specific bonus stage. Your goal in these bonus stages is the same as in the rest of the regular levels. Break every single box. All of them. Breaking these boxes not only gets you the 100% gem if you can bust them all, but all of the above mentioned collectibles are hidden inside boxes, and there's so many types too. There's the basic box, this one you gotta bounce on 5 times to get the max amount of fruit out of, the question mark ones that drop a bunch of fruit, ones with lives in them, bouncy boys, heck, even the checkpoints are boxes. There are also the TNT boxes that begin counting down once you bounce on them, and believe me, you do not want to spin them. And then there's also these iron boxes you can't break, and thus they don't count towards the total. There are these special iron boxes that act as switches, usually to spawn more boxes, but in the stage, the lab, they're used to open doors and close gaps. Clearly, if anything, these boxes are the central mechanic of the entire Crash Bandicoot series. There's so much potential here as a mechanic. Naughty Dog knew it too. Like, I just imagine one of the devs walking up and being like, "Hey, what you got there, Skippy?" And then the other one's like, "Sir, I just put in a cube that Crash can destroy." Then he takes off his sunglasses like, "Oh my god." But what makes these boxes so much fun? Well, 3 things. 1, it's compulsive for most gamers to want to cap off some sort of counter. You see from the very beginning how many boxes there are on a level, and you feel driven to bust them all open. 2, it just inherently feels good to bust them open. Whether you're spinning through them or bouncing on them, there's such a satisfaction to it. And 3, just the fact that you can bounce on them means that they're great for platforming. Heck, I consider the bonus sections to be some of the best parts of the game because bouncing from box to box leads to some really creative platforming sequences. Dropping all of these boxes all over each level also just makes the value of each stage better. They force you to slow down and take the time to hunt down every single one of them. If you miss any, that gives the level an obvious replay value, mainly because the level taunts you for missing any boxes. This is such a brilliant mechanic to include, and the designers really struck gold when they came up with it. In terms of story, there are only 2 real cutscenes. There's the one at the beginning and the one at the end. Both of these accomplish their goal incredibly quickly. The opening scene does a great job setting up the heroes and bad guys and our conflict in about a minute or so. and the ending cutscene wraps up everything neatly in about the same amount of time. Outside of these cutscenes, most of the storytelling is done by the game's world map. Each part of the map represents the level you're about to enter in some way, and I think this form of environmental storytelling is really great. However, with levels like the high ground, there's a tiny bit of a disconnect between the level and the map, but the map's so well constructed and packed with little details that I honestly don't even mind. From the lush jungles, beautiful waterfalls, the spooky temple ruins, and the rain of slippery climb, it all looks gorgeous and surprisingly natural. This creates a great contrast with the later mechanical levels. These look great in their own rights, but the neon colors or dark shadows contrast their lack of natural light with the rest of the world's abundance of it. This is another smart way to reinforce that Cortex is the main villain here. The characters populating these levels all have enough personality to also make the areas feel alive. Every enemy is animated with a passionate energy that makes this feel like a real place. Even all the bosses are memorable in their own ways, in no small part due to their animations and sound effects. I mean, look, I'll say this much for Ripperoo. That laugh. That laugh freaking rocks. None of these characters compare to Crash himself, though. He has so many animations that paint him as a good-spirited lunkhead. He looks scared when he's chased by the boulder. He makes this horrid face when he leaps on the pig. He blows on his hands when he's in a cold area. And just look at him when you clear a stage and get that gem. Versus when you miss a ton of boxes. And on top of that, he has so many unique death animations. It really helps make the trial and error gameplay a lot more bearable and lends the entire game a very Warner Brothers vibe. I've seen a lot of comparisons between Crash Bandicoot and Roadrunner as characters, and I think that's really accurate actually. Well, I think I've said about all I can say about the original Crash. I mean, it lays down a brilliant groundwork for gameplay, but it has some real rough edges. It's still a memorable, great first game bursting with personality though. So how do these next two games follow up? Apparently, like 2 seconds later, after Cortex falls off his tower in the first game, he discovers power crystals underground and decides to use them to power a space station in space. He doesn't have anyone on Earth willing to help him get the crystals though, so he literally kidnaps Crash and makes him
bring me the crystals, Crash. That is all I will say for now.
Meanwhile, Coco, oh yeah, Crash has a sister named Coco now, just to catch everybody up, and Embryo are warning Crash about working with Cortex. There's definitely more focus on the story here. A lot of people have cited that as a bad thing, but honestly, I really love it. These cutscenes are performed bombastically and are animated so energetically that I enjoyed watching every single scene.
The world is truly your concern. You must gather the gems, not the crystals. If you obtain all 42 gems, I can use them to focus a laser.
These changes made to the gameplay are really great in most respects. The first thing of note is Crash controls like 1,000,000 times better now. His jump moves at a normal speed, making on-the-fly decisions a lot more reasonable. But they also added a slide. This adds so much versatility to Crash with just the one move. You can slide into enemies to get rid of them, but you can also slide to crawl under obstacles, or you can chain together a slide and a jump to get super high. Crash feels less like a sack of meat, and more like a lovely fried bacon. Oh yeah, and he also has a belly flop. It breaks these specific boxes. Not really that impressive. But you know what is impressive? The addition of the nitro boxes. If you touch these, they will explode, possibly killing Crash. The only way to destroy them is to hit this trigger box that's usually at the end of the levels. It's a really satisfying feeling to just burst them all at once. So what about the levels themselves? Well, that discussion actually starts with the warp room. Instead of being able to only play one possible level at a time, they ditch the world map and have a series of 5 circular rooms that allow you to choose from 5 levels at a time. If you get stuck on one, you can easily choose another. It also means that completing the game is easier because instead of running back and forth across the map, you can focus on one room at a time. Okay, now the levels. There are the returning themes of the jungle and the river setting, but with tweaks. The jungle levels now have some more dynamic lighting, either being set in a light rain at dusk or in pitch black night. The river levels have an added gimmick where Crash gets to ride on a floaty hoverboard. I don't know. As for new themes, there's the icy snow levels that feature a change from the behind the back perspective to a side-scrolling segment sandwiched in the middle. There's also the sewer levels that like to occasionally branch into different paths. Ironically, they're the least guilty levels in terms of backtracking. More on that later. I just really love the aesthetic of the sewers. I'm really glad they didn't make it achy and brown, but the blue hues make it surprisingly appealing. The lower areas where you have to hang on grates also look really great, with their contrasting red hue. Next up we have these nighttime ruin levels. I hate these so much. These are usually the ones that force you to do a lot of behind the back precision platforming, and it's not really fun. Depth perception is definitely still an issue. You also have a space side-scrolling level that features really tricky obstacles and very adaptive enemies that naturally alter how you need to fight them on the fly. As for set-piece levels, we of course have the boulders returning. They have more tricky obstacle placements, trying to be more challenging this time. However, they shouldn't take more than a few tries, if you know what you're doing. The riding levels also return, this time on a polar bear and an Arctic setting. These obstacles have much better placement so you can see what's up before it's right in front of your face. One of the, well, I shouldn't say best, but definitely most memorable levels, Unbearable, sees Crash running from a giant angry bear. It proceeds like a regular level until the end where Crash jumps on the polar bear from earlier and makes a break for it at breakneck speed. The last level type we need to bring up is the jetpack levels, and they control like garbage. So you use the joystick to control Crash's position, but you need to push a button to actually move him forward. This control scheme makes Crash really disorienting to control, making the level drag on because you need to slow down and mentally process your next small move. It's a real shame because the music seems to think that you'll be blazing through these levels at top speed. Really, you only have to do 2 levels like this, so it's not a big deal, but if I was gonna fix it, here's what I'd do. I'd have the joystick move Crash forward and backward and side to side, and have a button control the altitude by having Crash fly up when you hold the button, and then fall slowly when it's released. I mean, it'd still be bad, but it'd be more manageable. Overall, I'd say that playing a level from beginning to end in Crash 2 is way more fun than in the first one. This is mostly due to Crash's better control, but also because the levels seem to be better constructed. And of course the bonus areas are fun and phenomenal as ever. Where this game becomes ridiculous and not fun is in 100%ing it. So in each level, you need to pick up the crystal on your way to the goal. I mean, ideally, they'd just be a reward for finishing the level, but whatever, not a huge deal. On top of this, there's the box gem you get for breaking every box in a stage. Usually this is fine, but in some levels like the pits, they force you to backtrack against the camera to be able to find every box. This is literally ridiculous. The camera sticks close to Crash because the engine expects the player to go forward. I don't appreciate it, and apparently the camera doesn't either. But breaking the boxes can now be an even bigger hassle than that, thanks to the new death routes. In addition to bonus routes, which are just located along the main path as an optional challenge now, there are these platforms that only appear if you don't die before reaching them. These take you to super tough sections that contain the rest of the boxes. I see all of these as maybe oversights, but they're definitely things that make the game unnecessarily difficult and complicated, and therefore drawn out, padded basically. If you miss a crystal or a death route or one box, you're gonna have to replay the stage and suffer through it again to get the collectibles. And don't even get me started on getting the extra colored gems. These are hidden behind random objectives, secret exits, death routes, you name it. And it's a pain in the butt even trying to figure out how to get them. The least egregious one is in the first level, Turtle Woods, where the game tells you to not break any boxes to the gem. It kind of annoys me that the game just straight up tells you, but I also acknowledge that not doing that would require the player being psychically aware of not breaking boxes. And that's the least bad gem to get. The red gem in Snow Go has you start in the level Air Crash, jump across these singular boxes to get to a secret exit that takes you to the secret warp room, entering Snow-Go's death route, getting to the end, nabbing the red gem, and then having to finish Snow-Go again so the game will actually give you the gem. I mean, I'm not normally a completionist, but this would literally make me grind my teeth and pull my hair out more than a regular playthrough of Crash 1 already does. And for what? A secret ending? I can just look that up online. I do want to clarify, I did get most of the box gems, but I definitely only went for a few of the color gems before realizing my mental health wasn't worth it. And the icing on top of this frustrating cake, the mediocre bosses. Ripperoo is back and fortunately is easier, but he's also just a simple case of the dodge then hit disease. The Komodo brothers are pathetically easy. Like, if you die to them, that's a big oof for you, my brother slash sister. Tiny Tiger's probably the best in the game just because it's actually interesting and tests your reflexes in a unique way. Injin has way too strict timing between when his vulnerability turns into an attack, and he goes on for way too long, which is only emphasized when you die and have to start over. Lastly, Cortex is a horrid final boss. Nothing hurts you, your only penalty is taking too long, and you just have to spin him 3 times. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, Crash Bandicoot may be a rusty classic, and Crash 2 is way more polished and improved in a lot of ways, but Crash 2's lows are way lower than anything Crash 1 threw at me. But don't worry, because I only have mostly praises for Crash 3. Something I'm actually really impressed with is the story. The opening cutscene is kind of bland, despite some great expressive animation. I mean, it's really just the same, oh no, an ancient evil has been returned from the dead premise that we've seen a million times before. It is nice to finally see some fun new characters though, and the time travel plot is a really fun idea. I really like the subtle subtext that Cortex is kind of becoming depressed, and he doesn't really feel like fighting anymore, but Uka Uka is making him fight and draining his mental health.
Why? Why must you continue to be a thorn in our side?
Who? What? Where was I? Oh, Tiny was a good fellow. He hated everyone and everything.
While we're talking about the presentation, we need to talk about the bosses. Not even the fights, just the characters themselves. In between levels, their heads pop up in the voids and threaten Crash.
So, Crash Bandicoot will meet again. Uka Uka and Dr. Cortex want me to teach you a lesson. Well, I made a few modifications to my mechanics.
Since Crash isn't on screen anywhere, it could just as well be them directly threatening the player. This works to give some effective beef before the fights even begin. But enough about presentation. Let's talk level variety. In terms of levels, the time travel premise has really brought an incredible set of new themes. For Crash's platforming feats, we have a medieval fantasy theme full of enchanted frogs, wizards, and knights. A prehistoric tar pit where you get chased by dinosaurs, an Arabian city full of grates to climb on, the inside of an Egyptian pyramid full of booby traps, and also a darkness level, and a futuristic city built by Cortex. You access these from Dr. Entropy's Time Twister. It's basically just a glorified warp room, the main difference being that it's rendered as one set instead of 5. To select levels, you stand on a button to make the portal open up. It's novel, but it's a little bit cumbersome. It doesn't really matter much since you'll spend most of your time in these diverse levels. The visual variety here is matched only by the gameplay variety, and it only gets more complex as the game goes on. After each boss, Crash unlocks new moves this time, meaning the coming levels can toy with it in some fun ways. There's an accelerated belly flop, which is a godsend as it makes a pretty useless move less annoying. We then have a double jump, which is very helpful, and then you unlock a tornado spin that allows you to glide. This can be great for clearing out large chunks of boxes or even skipping parts of a level. And last and certainly least, there is the Fruit Bazooka. This stops Crash in place, unlike the other new moves, so he can blast a fruit at stuff. It's great for blasting nitro boxes, but that's really it. Not a terribly fun move, especially when you've got so many more options that allow you to blast through a stage with a good amount of momentum. I would argue that the new moves and even the refined designs make these the most satisfying platforming levels in the series. I would be willing to sit down and play any of these any day. So that's it then, right? Crash 3 is guaranteed the best in the series? Well, about that. Crash isn't actually the focus of the game so much this time. There's actually an even greater variety of levels, these ones revolving around using different vehicles. There's the swimming levels. The riding levels return featuring Coco riding a cute little tiger cub across the Great Wall of China, Coco riding a jet ski to maneuver around pirate ships, Crash racing on a motorcycle in the 50s, and Crash shooting down blimps and planes in a World War I setting. Here's the issue. While I enjoy most of these gimmicks in concept, the actual levels they get put in can be pretty frustrating. While they're all pretty straightforward, they do tend to rely on pretty strict timing or on throwing a billion obstacles around you at blinding speeds. That's something the platforming levels actually avoid. They don't feel so trial and error this time because the obstacles are more spread out. In Crash 1, the stages were well designed, but incredibly tight, and they had a bunch of tricky obstacles back to back. Crash 2 improved on this in some ways, mostly in Crash's movement, but Crash 3 expanded both the level spaces and Crash's movement, finally perfecting the formula. It seems the vehicles would have gone through this stage of iteration and improvement as well, but since they're just now being introduced, they're in that strict, overwhelming Crash 1 phase. I'm probably making them sound like the worst things ever. They're not really that horrible. They're not bad at all, but they tend to be less fun and more frustration-inducing than the platforming stages. At least completing the game is rather straightforward now. There's still the crystals you need to gather just like before. Usually they're still in the middle of levels. The plane and bike levels get it right, however, and give it to you for finishing the stage. Then there's the gem you get for busting every box, and that's the same in every level. Fortunately, there are no annoying double paths or anything. Any remaining gems are at the end of death routes, which only occasionally have extra boxes. What makes completing this game unique is the time trials. If you touch this clock on a revisit to a level, you can use all your moves to blaze through to get the best relics. What makes this so fun is the upgrades, especially the dash you get for beating the final boss. Speaking of bosses, they don't suck this time. Yeah! They don't go on for too long, there's non-stop action. Tiny Tiger is easy, but it's still a spectacle with its gladiator theme. Dingodile is literally one of the best characters in this franchise, with a tense test in dodging his blasts and hitting him and trying to get out before his pack explodes. Dr. Entropy is really just a short platforming level, but a fun one nevertheless. There's a rematch against Engine where Coco gets to pilot a space gunship, which is pathetically easy, but fun and satisfying anyways because of how many explosions are going on screen. And then there's the iconic final battle with Dr. Neo Cortex. While trying to dodge his blasts and bombs, you need to avoid being collateral damage between Aku Aku and Uka Uka's fight for the ages. It's tense, and I love it! You know, I honestly cannot believe I haven't gushed about the music this long. I can't really put all the songs in context, so I'm going to talk about each game's soundtrack vibes as a whole, and then play a selection from each game. Got it? Cool. Crash 1's whole vibe usually focuses more on ambience. Most of the early levels focus on sounding more atmospheric and natural, using xylophones, flutes, and drums. But later levels use synthy sounds and electric guitar to contrast Crash's nature with Cortex's menacing property. It's not afraid to have fun and sound more goofy at times though, leading to its more standout tracks. Here's my personal favorites. Crash 2 has a more whimsical setting, with Crash zooping around through space to different areas. As such, the soundtrack becomes more melody-driven, as well as having more synths and cartoony sounds. It definitely gives off a more surf music vibe this time. Crash 3 definitely is the best overall soundtrack in my opinion. This game finally introduced a kick-butt main theme for the whole series. It also uses a lot of different genres to fit each time period, but the real highlight tracks are the bosses. In fact, original composer Josh Mansell's favorite track is for the boss Dingodile. He talks about it in this clip from the Pixelated Audio podcast.
For some reason, it just, like, everything came together, and to me it feels a lot more organic than a lot of the other Crash tunes, and I don't know if it's because of the saxophone or something about it just kind of makes it feel more like a rock band playing. Mm-hmm. But once again, apparently this is not a very hard boss round, so you get a lot of people who said, "Oh my god, I've never listened to the whole thing because I was so
I killed the boss in a minute."
Exactly, over and done in 10 seconds. So here we've come full circle to Papu Papu, the animatronic,
oh jeez,
villain on a stick,
Yeah.
You can find that whole podcast using the link above. Now here's my list of tracks. notice the twangy motif for the final battle themes. This is actually my favorite idea in the franchise. Not only does it create a through line for each showdown with Cortex, but the song itself sounds so sad. Most of these themes sound angry until that guitar comes in. Then they just sound sad. It really paints this yellow mad scientist cartoon dude in a tragic light. Alright, wrapping up. Would I say any of these games are perfect? Heck no. Crash 1 is janky and clunky and old. Crash 2 requires a ridiculous amount from you in terms of completion, and Crash 3 would have even been better if it chose to focus on platforming. But would I say these games are important classics? Absolutely. Crash was Sony's most recognizable character back in the day, and while these games have issues, big issues, they're still fun, and you can tell the people who made these games had such passion that they put into these games. And that goes for both the remake and the originals. I think it's about high time Crash came back, and it looks like with his racing debut being remade, we may have a full chance for him to be restored. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but I'm incredibly excited to see what's up next for the fuzzy orange marsupial.